There's a disturbing pattern most people never notice about their relationship with money. It's not about intelligence, it's not about luck, and it's not about opportunity. The wealthiest people in your life aren't necessarily smarter than you, but they have something you might not. They've broken a cycle that the majority remains trapped in. A cycle so invisible, so normalized, that most people don't even recognize they're in it. Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote that the slave makes his master a slave of passion. And while he was speaking philosophically, the metaphor applies to something deeper, how we willingly enslave ourselves to habits that keep us financially stagnant, emotionally drained, and constantly chasing the next paycheck. The truth most people refuse to accept is this: your poverty is not something that happened to you. It's something you're actively participating in. Every single day. You see, there exists a specific set of psychological patterns, behaviors that feel normal, that feel justified, that feel even virtuous, but they are systematically destroying your financial autonomy. And the worst part? Most people defend these patterns. They rationalize them. They call them values. In this video, we're going to uncover the 6 habits that are keeping you broke. Not because you're lazy, not because you're stupid, but because nobody ever showed you what these patterns actually are, or how to recognize them when they show up. These aren't just financial tips. These are psychological truths that will reshape how you see yourself, your money, and your potential. Before we move on, take a quick second to subscribe to the channel. Habit 1: the comfort paradox. Choosing stability over growth. Most people believe that the path to wealth is a straight line. Work a job, save money, invest, repeat. But here's what they don't understand. The pursuit of comfort is the death of wealth. Listen to what Nietzsche understood about human nature. He observed that people naturally drift toward the easiest path, not the most rewarding path, the easiest one. We call this mediocrity, but really, it's just human nature seeking equilibrium. You stay in a job that pays adequately because leaving feels risky. That job becomes your prison disguised as your safety net. You make just enough money to avoid desperation, but never enough to gain freedom. And the psychological trap is brilliant, because your rational mind has justified it all. I need stability. I have responsibilities. This is the adult thing to do. But here's the hidden truth. Stability is a luxury only the wealthy can afford. When you choose a stable, moderately paying job over the discomfort of building something, learning something difficult, or taking a calculated risk, you've made a choice. You've chosen security over wealth. And the mathematics of that choice compound against you year after year. The person who built something from nothing didn't have more security, they had less. They accepted the discomfort that you refused. And that discomfort became their advantage. Carl Jung wrote about something called individuation, the process of becoming who you're meant to become, which requires confronting the parts of yourself that terrify you. The parts that say, "What if you fail? What if people judge you?" When you choose comfort, you're rejecting your own individuation. You're shrinking to fit into a mold that society considers safe. Real wealth requires you to become someone different, someone willing to be uncomfortable, someone willing to be judged, someone willing to work when others rest. The hidden motivation behind comfort seeking isn't caution. It's fear dressed up as wisdom. Habit 2: comparing your beginning to someone else's middle. This is perhaps the most psychologically destructive habit in the modern world. Social media has weaponized something that existed in human psychology for centuries: comparison. But now, you can compare your financial life to 10,000 people simultaneously, in real time, with carefully curated images of their success. And here's where most people get it wrong. They see someone else's wealth and think, "I'm behind." I'm failing. I need to catch up. But what they're really experiencing is what psychologists call relative deprivation. Your brain isn't measuring your success against your own past. It's measuring it against other people. The Stoic philosophers understood something crucial about this. Marcus Aurelius, one of the most powerful men in Rome, constantly reminded himself that comparing himself to others was not only futile, it was a mental poison. He wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." But you've been sold the opposite message. You've been told that ambition requires comparison, that you need to see what others have achieved to know what's possible, that jealousy is a motivator. It's not. It's a psychological trap. When you compare your beginning to someone else's middle, several things happen simultaneously. First, you develop what Jung called shadow projection. You project your own insecurities onto them. You imagine they're happier than they are, richer than they are, more successful than they are. You build a false narrative about their life. Second, you develop what's called social comparison bias. You don't compare your current self to their current self. You compare your worst self to their best self, your insecurity to their highlight reel. And third, and this is the devastating part, you begin to resent the path you're on. Because you're no longer pursuing wealth for the freedom it offers. You're pursuing it to not be less than someone else. That's the slavery Nietzsche spoke of. You've outsourced your goals to other people's lives. Real wealth building requires something different. It requires obsessive focus on your own metrics, not theirs. Your income, your skills, your assets, your compound growth. The moment you stop asking, "Am I doing better than them?" and start asking, "Am I doing better than I was last year?" everything changes. Habit 3, mistaking busyness for productivity. There's a silent epidemic in the modern world. People are completely, utterly exhausted. They work long hours, skip meals, sacrifice sleep, and feel like they're getting nowhere. And they've been convinced that this exhaustion is a sign of virtue, that suffering through work equals moral character. But here's the psychological truth. Busyness is often a form of avoidance. When you stay constantly busy, you never have to face the harder questions. Am I doing the right work? Am I building something real? Am I actually moving forward, or just running on a treadmill? Busyness numbs you to these questions. The Stoics had a concept called wisdom through action, but it wasn't about being busy. It was about deliberate action. Epictetus said, "It is not the man who has too little who is poor, but he whose desires exceed his means." And we could add, "It is not the man who works the most who builds wealth, but he who works with intention." Most people work like they're possessed. They move from task to task, email to email, project to project, never actually completing anything of significance. They've confused activity with accomplishment. The person who builds wealth thinks differently. They ask, "What is the highest leverage activity I can do today?" Not, "What can I get done today?" This is where Nietzsche's concept of the will to power becomes relevant. Most people don't have a will to power. They have a will to survive. They work to pay bills, not to build something. And that fundamental difference determines everything. When you're constantly busy, you also deplete your decision-making capacity. Psychologists call this decision fatigue. By the end of the day, you have no mental energy left to plan, to strategize, or to think about your future. You're too exhausted, so you stay on the treadmill. You can't afford to step off because you're too tired to figure out what comes next. This is a deliberate trap, whether intentional or not. Busy people don't have time to become wealthy. Because wealth building requires thought. It requires strategy. It requires saying no to most things, so you can say yes to the few things that actually matter. Habit 4, performing for people you don't respect. This is a subtle one, but it's absolutely devastating. Most people have organized their entire lives around the opinions of people they don't actually respect. Family members who never understood them, colleagues who envy their success, friends who only call when they need something. And yet, these are the people they're trying to impress. Think about it. How much of your financial decision-making is based on what other people will think? How many purchases do you make because they project a certain image? How much of your work choice is based on status rather than fulfillment? Nietzsche called this slave morality. He observed that weak people band together and create moral frameworks specifically designed to make strong people feel guilty for being excellent. They call excellence arrogance. They call ambition greed. They call high standards unrealistic. And then, if you're not careful, you internalize their values. You begin to perform for their approval. You limit your success to stay within the moral boundaries they've created. But here's what nobody tells you. The people worth impressing are rarely the people watching your life the most carefully. The people worth impressing are building something themselves. They're too busy with their own vision to be jealous of yours. The people constantly monitoring your success, ready to criticize or diminish it, are usually people who are stagnant themselves. They have a vested interest in keeping you small, because your growth highlights their stagnation. Jung wrote extensively about the concept of the persona, the mask we wear for society. He observed that people often become trapped in their personas. They mistake their mask for their actual self. They think they are what they're performing. And when you're performing for people who don't respect you, for people whose opinions don't actually matter, you're building your entire life on an illusion. Your financial choices, your career choices, your lifestyle, all based on ghosts. The person who becomes wealthy does something terrifying. They stop caring what most people think. Not because they're arrogant, but because they've finally realized that the people whose opinions matter are a very small group. And usually, those people are rooting for their success, not undermining it. Habit 5, believing the story that your background determines your destiny. Most people come from somewhere limiting. A family with financial struggle. An education that didn't prepare them. A zip code that predisposed them to scarcity. And then they take that reality and turn it into a story. A story where they are victims, where the circumstances of their birth are permanent identities. But here's the psychological truth. Your past is not your future. But the stories you tell yourself about your past will absolutely determine your future. This is where Stoicism becomes incredibly practical. The Stoic philosophers, particularly Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus, made a crucial distinction. What happens to you is not in your control, but how you interpret what happened that is entirely within your control. You cannot control that you were born into poverty, but you can control what that poverty means. You cannot control that you didn't get a certain education, but you can control whether you educate yourself now. You cannot control the circumstances of your family, but you can control whether you let that define you. Most people skip this last step. They acknowledge their circumstances and then treat those circumstances as destiny. People like me don't become wealthy. People from my background don't succeed. I'm not the type of person who... This is where Carl Jung's concept of the shadow becomes crucial. Everyone has a shadow, the parts of themselves that they've rejected, repressed, or refused to acknowledge. And often, your story about your limitations is actually a manifestation of your shadow. The person who grew up poor and stays poor often isn't limited by money. They're limited by an identity, by a story, by a psychological refusal to believe that they could be someone different from what they've always been. But becoming wealthy requires exactly that. Becoming someone different. Developing new beliefs, new habits, new values, new identity. The psychological barrier isn't external, it's internal. It's the identity you've built around your limitations. Real transformation begins when you stop saying I'm poor and start asking what would someone wealthy do in my situation. You don't ask this to deny your reality. You ask it to transcend your story. Habit 6, optimizing for the wrong metrics. Here's something nobody talks about. You're probably measuring your life by the wrong measurements. You measure success by how many likes you get, how impressive your job title sounds, how much you impress people at parties, how big your house is relative to your neighbor's house. But none of these metrics actually correlate with freedom, with peace, with genuine wealth. This is what the Stoics called false goods. They distinguished between things that are genuinely good virtue, wisdom, strength, discipline, and things that merely appear good but are actually empty fame, status, possessions, approval. Modern capitalism has spent billions convincing you that the appearance metrics are what matter. Your car matters. Your clothes matter. The size of your house matters. The exclusivity of your vacation matters. But here's what people who actually build wealth understand. Those metrics are for people who are trying to convince others that they're successful. People who are actually successful are optimizing for different metrics. They optimize for financial freedom, for time, for autonomy, for the ability to say no to things that don't align with their values. They optimize for compounding, for leverage, for assets that generate passive income. And the psychology of this is crucial. When you optimize for the wrong metrics, you create a life that looks impressive on the outside, but feels hollow on the inside. You work constantly, but never feel wealthy. You earn more, but feel more anxious. You accumulate possessions, but feel less free. This is what Nietzsche meant when he spoke of people living lives of quiet desperation. They're following a script that someone else wrote. They're measuring success by someone else's standards, and they'll never feel satisfied because they're chasing a finish line that wasn't designed for them. The shift happens when you ask yourself, what metrics actually matter to me? Not to my parents, not to society, not to Instagram, to me. For most people, the answer is freedom, time, security, the ability to spend time with people they love, the ability to pursue interests without financial stress, the ability to help others without depleting themselves. But these metrics aren't taught in school. They're not discussed at work. They're not the default metrics of the culture. So people optimize for the wrong thing, achieve it, and then feel empty. So why do people engage in these patterns? The answer is deeper than just ignorance. It's about the fundamental way the human psyche is structured. First, fear. All of these habits are rooted in fear. Fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of being alone, fear of being seen, fear of change. The nervous system is designed to keep you safe, to keep you in the known, to avoid anything that might result in pain. But wealth building requires constantly stepping outside the known. It requires doing things that feel dangerous, things that feel impossible. And most people's nervous systems are screaming, no. Second, the need for belonging. Humans are social creatures. We need to feel like we belong to a group. And every group has implicit rules, unspoken codes about what's acceptable. When you try to break those codes, when you try to succeed beyond what your family expects, or your peer group normalizes, or your community finds acceptable, you trigger something called social anxiety. Your brain essentially says, if you do this, people might reject you. And rejection meant death in our ancestral environment. Third, ego protection. This is the Jung part. Your ego has spent years building an identity, building a story about who you are. I'm not a wealthy person. I'm not ambitious. I'm not someone who takes risks. I'm practical. I'm responsible. And when you try to change, your ego doesn't experience this as growth. It experiences it as death. The ego is actually trying to protect you by keeping you the same. Fourth, social conditioning. You've been taught these patterns since childhood. You've been rewarded for being compliant, for fitting in, for not challenging authority, for being comfortable. These lessons are so deep that you don't even recognize them as lessons anymore. They feel like truth. And fifth, the modern attention economy. You're being deliberately manipulated by technologies and systems designed to keep you in these patterns. Social media is engineered to maximize comparison. Marketing is engineered to keep you focused on status symbols. The job market is engineered to keep you dependent on employment. You're not weak for struggling with these patterns. You're experiencing the full force of human psychology and modern systems designed to keep you exactly where you are. But understanding this is the first step to freedom. Now, knowing these patterns doesn't automatically free you from them, but it gives you the foundation to respond differently. First, acknowledge that change will feel uncomfortable. The Stoics understood that the path to freedom requires discomfort. Your goal isn't to be comfortable. Your goal is to be free. Expect resistance from your nervous system. Expect doubt. Expect criticism from people around you. These aren't signs you're doing it wrong. These are signs you're doing it right. Second, become ruthlessly honest about your metrics. Write down what you're actually optimizing for in your life right now. Is it the approval of people you don't respect? Is it status? Is it the absence of pain? Once you see it clearly, you can choose different metrics. You can decide that you're optimizing for autonomy, or impact, or creative expression, or genuine security. Third, reduce your exposure to comparison environments. This doesn't mean you can't use social media. It means you become intentional about it. You unfollow people who trigger comparison. You follow people who are building things. You consume content that expands your sense of what's possible rather than contracting it. Fourth, start building a new identity through small, consistent actions. You don't become a wealthy person by thinking differently. You become a wealthy person by acting differently. Every financial decision is an opportunity to act like someone who's building wealth rather than someone who's stuck in scarcity. Fifth, surround yourself with people who are doing what you want to do. The psychologist Albert Bandura called this social modeling. Your brain learns by observing others. If everyone around you is stuck in these patterns, your brain will default to those patterns. But if you spend time with people who are building wealth, who are taking risks, who are optimizing for freedom, your brain will begin to learn different patterns. The stakes for understanding this have never been higher. We're living in what psychologists call an attention economy. Every application, every algorithm, every piece of content is designed to keep you scrolling, comparing, consuming. The systems around you are literally engineered to reinforce these habits. Social media has taken the natural human tendency toward comparison and industrialized it. You can now spend hours per day comparing your life to thousands of curated lives. Your brain is being flooded with dopamine hits that make you feel less than. And simultaneously, we're living in an era of unprecedented opportunity. You can learn almost anything from the internet. You can build a business from your laptop. You can access financial education that previous generations never had access to. But most people won't take advantage of this because they're caught in these patterns. They're too busy, too focused on appearances, too afraid, too caught in old stories. The people who will actually build wealth in the next decade are the ones who understand the psychology behind their own limitations, who recognize these patterns in themselves, who have the discipline to respond differently. They won't be different because they're smarter. They'll be different because they're brave enough to feel uncomfortable. to disappoint people, to fail publicly, to build something nobody believes in. And that psychological difference, that's what separates wealth from poverty. Here's what you need to understand as you leave this video. These 6 habits aren't moral failings. You're not weak for being caught in them. You're human. Your brain is literally designed to protect you, to keep you safe, to seek approval, to avoid discomfort. But you have something more powerful than your brain's default settings. You have consciousness. You have the ability to observe your patterns. You have the ability to choose differently. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus said something that was considered radical in his time and remains radical now. No one can rob you of your free will. And he was right. No one can force you to stay in these patterns. Not your family, not your circumstances, not your past, not the algorithms designed to keep you stuck. But you have to do something that most people never do. You have to decide that your freedom is worth more than your comfort. You have to decide that your potential is worth more than other people's approval. You have to decide that the person you could become is worth the discomfort of becoming them. This is what Nietzsche meant by the will to power. Not the power over others, but the power to become who you're meant to become. The power to transcend your limitations. The power to build something real. The person you're watching this video to become, that person is waiting for you to make these choices. That person is waiting for you to break these patterns. That person already exists. You just have to do the psychological work to become them. And the world doesn't need another person who's comfortable, approved of, and stagnant. The world needs you to be powerful, to be free, to be wealthy not just in money, but in time, in autonomy, in presence, in authenticity. That's not selfish. That's essential.